guest sees Cook crying on the floor, and the secret she shares changes his life. Robert Anderson never imagined that a corporate event would completely change his life. The 42-year-old businessman had arrived earlier than expected at the event hall of the Palm Grove Hotel in Denver for an important meeting with investors. It was March 2024, and the intense heat of the New York summer had everyone seeking the comfort of air conditioning. As he walked down the hallway looking for the restroom, Robert heard a sound that made him stop. It was muffled sobs coming from the kitchen. For a moment, he hesitated, wondering if he should simply ignore it and go on his way. But something about that crying touched him deeply. It was a sound of pure pain, the kind of suffering that comes from the depths of the soul. Gently pushing open the kitchen door, Robert saw a scene he would never forget. A woman dressed in the white chef's uniform was kneeling on the floor, her hands covering her face, crying as if her heart were breaking. Her shoulders shook with each sob, and even with the cap covering part of her brown hair, it was clear she was completely distraught. "I'm sorry, Robert began, unsure of what to say. The woman quickly lifted her face, revealing red, swollen eyes from crying. She was about 38, with delicate features marked by exhaustion. There was a natural beauty about her that even her suffering couldn't entirely hide. "I didn't know anyone was here," she said, hastily trying to compose herself, and wiping her tears with the back of her hands. "You shouldn't be in the kitchen. I know, I'm sorry, but are you okay?" Robert asked, genuinely concerned. The woman tried to force a smile, but it was useless. Her tears kept falling, and she seemed to be fighting a losing battle against her emotions. "It's fine, it's just a tough day," she lied, clearly trying to dismiss him. Robert couldn't just walk away. There was something about the situation that moved him inexplicably. Maybe it was the raw vulnerability he saw before him, or perhaps it was because he rarely encountered people who showed their emotions so openly and honestly. Can I help in any way?" he asked, taking a step forward. The cook looked at him with a mix of surprise and wariness. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers, especially well-dressed men who clearly belonged to the business world. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to sound firmer than she felt. "Robert Anderson. I'm one of the guests at today's event. And you?" "Emily Parker," she answered hesitantly, still wiping her tears. "I'm the head chef in charge of tonight's dinner." Robert glanced around. The kitchen was spotless, modern, with all the equipment needed for high-quality service. He could tell Emily was clearly a skilled professional. Half-prepared dishes were arranged with military precision, spices were strategically placed, and everything indicated she knew her craft well. "What happened, Emily?" he asked in a softer voice. Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to send this stranger away and get back to work, but there was something in the way he asked, a sincerity in his voice that made her lower her guard for a moment. "It's complicated," she said, kneeling again to pick up a spoon that had fallen during her moment of despair. "I've got time," Robert replied, surprising himself. He never got involved in other people's personal problems, always keeping a professional and emotional distance from those around him. Emily stopped what she was doing and looked at him again. There was something different about this man. It wasn't the typical morbid curiosity some people have about others' suffering. It was genuine concern. "Why do you care?" she asked, directly. It was a fair question, and Robert didn't have a clear answer. He had lost his wife in a car accident 3 years earlier, and since then, he had emotionally shut himself off from the world. He focused only on work, avoided deep connections, and lived in an automatic routine that shielded him from pain. But something in that moment was awakening feelings he had buried long ago. "I don't know," he admitted honestly, "but I recognize suffering when I see it." Emily felt her defenses begin to crumble. She had carried her burden alone for months with no one to talk to, no one who truly understood her situation. "Today marks exactly 1 year, she began, her voice still shaky. "1 year of what?" Robert asked gently. Since I lost my daughter," Emily said, the words coming out as if each one cut her throat. Robert felt his heart tighten. The loss of a child was something he couldn't even fathom, and seeing her suffer like that brought his own unresolved pain to the surface. "I'm so sorry," he said simply, knowing words couldn't lessen pain of that magnitude. "She was only 7 years old," Emily continued, as if once she started speaking she couldn't stop. "Olivia, she was everything to me, my whole world." The tears returned in full force, and this time Emily didn't try to hide them. Robert stepped closer, and in an impulse that surprised him, offered his handkerchief. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the gesture. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. "She was with me here at the hotel. That day," Emily went on, her voice steadier now, as if telling the story was a painful but necessary need. "It was a Saturday and I had to work a big wedding. I had no one to leave Olivia with, so I brought her along." Robert listened in silence, sensing that Emily needed to speak more than he needed to hear the details. "She loved being in the kitchen. With me, always wanted to be a chef when she grew up. She'd sit right there in that corner." Emily pointed to a small chair in the kitchen, drawing or playing with her dolls while I worked. The image of a child playing in that professional kitchen made Robert smile sadly. He could picture the little girl, curious about her mother's work, asking endless questions about every ingredient. She was so bright, always asking how things worked, why I used certain spices. She said one day she'd have a restaurant even, bigger than Mommy's. Emily smiled through her tears, lost in the memories. "Sounds like she was a special girl," Robert remarked softly. She was all the good in the world," Emily replied, her voice full of love and longing. "But that day I was so stressed. The wedding was for 300 people. The bride's family was very demanding and I was trying to prove I could handle big events on my own." Robert began to understand that Emily was carrying more than just the pain of loss. There was guilt there, the kind that eats away at a person's soul. Olivia was being a normal kid, asking questions, wanting to help, needing attention, but I was so focused on work, so frazzled with everything. Emily paused, struggling to go on. "You don't have to continue if it's too hard," Robert said gently. "No, I need to. It's been a year since I've talked about this with anyone," she replied, determined. "I was preparing the main course when she asked if she could go to the bathroom. I just nodded, didn't even look at her properly. I was too busy with the sauce that couldn't burn." The silence in the kitchen was almost tangible. Robert could feel she was reaching the most painful part of the story. She left the kitchen, and I didn't even realize how much time had passed. I was so focused on my work. When I finally noticed she hadn't come back, it had already been over an hour. Emily's words were broken by emotion. "What happened?" Robert asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "The hotel pool," Emily said simply, and those 4 words carried the weight of the world. She wasn't a strong swimmer. She was just playing by the edge, but she slipped. When they found her..." Emily couldn't finish the sentence. She broke down in tears again, and this time Robert didn't hesitate. He knelt beside her and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It wasn't your fault," he said firmly. "Yes, it was," Emily replied immediately. "I was her mother. It was my responsibility to watch over her. But I was more worried about a damn sauce than my own daughter." Robert knew the kind of guilt that eats a person from the inside. After losing his wife, he spent months blaming himself for not insisting she didn't drive that rainy night, for not picking her up from work, for 1,000 small decisions that might have changed fate. "Emily, look at me," he said, waiting, until she raised her reddened eyes to meet his. "Accidents happen. You couldn't have predicted what would happen, but I could have paid more attention to her. I could have said no to that job. I could have found someone to watch her," Emily argued, clearly repeating thoughts that had tormented her for a year. "What if I told you I understand exactly how you feel?" Robert said softly. Emily looked at him with curiosity for the first time, truly noticing the man before her. He had brown hair with a few graying strands at his temples, blue eyes that seemed to carry their own scars, and an expression that mixed strength and vulnerability. "I lost my wife 3 years," Ego, Robert continued, and I spent a long time blaming myself for things beyond my control. How did you manage to move on? Emily asked, and for the first time in a year, her voice held a hint of hope. Robert laughed bitterly. Who said I did? I just exist. I work, go home, sleep, and repeat it all the next day. I don't know if that's moving on. Robert's brutal honesty was like a mirror for Emily. She too had just been existing, passing days in a fog of pain and automatic routine. But you're here today, she observed. You left the house, came to an event, even stopped to talk to me. That's more than I do. I just work. It's the only thing that keeps me functioning. Is the kitchen your refuge? Robert asked, glancing around the space that was clearly Emily's domain. It was. Before, cooking was my passion. Every dish was a work of art. Every meal a way to make people happy. Now it's just a distraction from the pain, she admitted. Robert noticed the precise movements Emily made even as they talked, how she unconsciously organized the utensils around her. It was clear cooking was in her DNA, even if the passion was temporarily buried under layers of grief. Why are you working today, on the anniversary? He asked. Because if I stayed home, I don't know what I'd do with myself, Emily confessed. At least here I can pretend I'm functional, that I still know who I am. At that moment, the kitchen door swung open and a young waiter hurried in. Chef Emily, sorry to interrupt, but the guests are arriving, and we need to know about the timing for the cocktail hour, he said, stopping abruptly as he took in the scene in the kitchen. Emily quickly stood up, wiping her eyes and trying to regain her professional composure. Of course, Tyler. The cocktails can be served in 15 minutes. The shrimp pies are ready, and the free-range chicken croquettes will be out of the oven. In 5 minutes, she replied, her voice returning to its firm and controlled tone. Got it, chef. Are you okay? The waiter asked, noticing Emily's red eyes. Everything's fine. Go ahead and prepare the trays. Emily dismissed him efficiently. When they were alone again, Robert stood up too, smoothing his suit and preparing to leave. I should let you get back to work, he said. Wait, Emily called out impulsively. Will you stay for the event? Yes. My meeting isn't until 7 tonight. Why? Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure exactly why she didn't want him to leave. It's been a long time since I've had a real conversation with someone, and today, of all days, I understand, Robert said, nodding sympathetically. Listen, if you'd like, I can come back after my meeting. Maybe you'd want to talk some more. Emily felt something she hadn't in a long time, the possibility of not facing her pain alone. I think I'd like that, she admitted. Then I'll see you later, Robert said, heading toward the door. But before leaving, he turned back once more. Emily, your daughter wouldn't want to see you suffering like this forever. The words lingered in the kitchen after he left, and Emily felt something shift in her chest. It was as if a tiny crack had formed in the wall of ice she'd built around her heart. For the next 3 hours, Emily worked with the automatic efficiency she'd perfected over the past year. She prepared elaborate dishes, coordinated her team, and supervised every detail of service. But her mind was split between her tasks and the conversation she'd had with Robert. It was strange how a complete stranger had managed to make her talk about Olivia after a year of total silence on the subject. With friends and family, she always changed the subject or simply walked away when her daughter's name came up. But there was something about the way Robert listened, without judgment, without offering cheap solutions to a pain that had no easy fix. During the cocktail hour, Emily discreetly watched Robert through the small kitchen window. He chatted with other business people, smiled at the right moments, and played his part in the social game of networking. But she could see beyond the professional mask. There was a melancholy in his eyes, a smile that didn't quite reach them, small, signs of someone who was also just playing the role of a functional person. By 6:30 in the evening, the kitchen was relatively calm. Dinner was nearly ready, and Emily had given part of the team a break before the main service. She was alone, seasoning the salmon when Robert appeared again at the kitchen door. "May I come in?" he asked. "Of course," Emily replied, noticing he'd taken off his jacket and loosened his tie. He looked more relaxed, less formal. "How was your meeting?" she asked as she continued working. "Successful, at least professionally," Robert answered, stepping closer to the counter where she worked. "It's impressive watching you cook. Even from a distance during the cocktail hour, I could tell you're truly talented." Emily paused and looked at him. It had been a long time since someone had genuinely complimented her work. "Thank you. But I haven't felt very talented lately," she admitted. "Why not?" Because before, when I cooked, I felt love in every dish. I cooked thinking about how I'd make people happy, how each flavor would tell a story. Now it's just technique, memorized movements, rehearsed recipes. The soul has left the food," Emily explained, voicing something she hadn't even realized she felt until she said it aloud. Robert watched her movements as she spoke. Even as she claimed to have lost her passion, it was obvious there was something special in how she handled ingredients, how she smelled each spice before using it, how she adjusted the salt just by the sound it made in the pan. "Do you have children?" Emily asked suddenly. "No," Robert replied, a shadow crossing his face. "Catherine and I tried for years, but it never happened. She said we'd be parents when the time was right. We always believed we had time." "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked," Emily immediately regretted. "No, it's all right. It's good to talk about her sometimes," Robert said, surprising himself again with his own honesty. "Catherine would have loved to meet you. She had a special passion for talented chefs. She said people who cook with love have special souls." "She sounds like she was an amazing person," Emily said softly. "She was. She had this way of seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves," Robert replied. And after a pause added, "Just like your daughter probably saw in you." Emily felt her eyes well up with tears again, but this time it wasn't just sadness. There was something else, a sweet longing for the good memories with Olivia. "She loved helping me in the kitchen at home," Emily said, allowing herself to remember. "She always wanted to mix something, even if it was just stirring a sauce. She said food tasted better when two people made it together." "She was right," Robert said. "Food made with company always has a special flavor." For a few hours, Emily and Robert kept talking as she finished dinner preparations. He told her about his business consulting firm, how he'd become a workaholic after losing Catherine. She shared how she'd started cooking as a teenager, her dreams of one day owning her own restaurant. It was strange how easily they moved between deep topics and trivial ones, shifting naturally between serious moments and lighter ones. For the first time in a long while, Emily laughed genuinely when Robert told her about his disastrous first attempt at cooking after his wife's passing. "I tried to fry an egg and somehow burned the outside while leaving it raw inside," he said, laughing at himself. "Didn't even know that was physically possible." "Everyone learning to cook goes through that," Emily chuckled. "Olivia did the same thing when she tried making scrambled eggs by herself at 6. She was so proud of the result that she ate it all, even though it was terrible." It was the first time in a year Emily had been able to share a story about her daughter without completely breaking down. The pain was still there. It always would be. But for a moment she could remember the joy Olivia had brought to her life, not just the tragedy of how she'd left. Dinner was served at 8, and Emily worked with her team to ensure every dish was perfect. But now there was something different in her demeanor. She was still the same skilled professional, but there was a small light in her eyes that hadn't been there a few hours earlier. Robert joined the other guests for dinner, but his eyes often drifted back toward the kitchen. He could see Emily through the window, commanding her team with authority, tasting each dish before it went out, adjusting seasonings when needed. When the event finally ended around 11 at night, Robert waited for most of the guests to leave before returning to the kitchen. Emily was alone, cleaning the last utensils, her uniform slightly stained and her hair escaping from her cap. "How was the dinner out there?" she asked without looking up from what she was doing. "Perfect. I heard a lot of compliments about the food," Robert answered honestly. "Especially about the salmon. Several people asked who the chef was." Emily smiled slightly but didn't comment. She kept scrubbing a large pot with precise movements. "Emily," Robert said, stepping closer to the counter where she worked, "can I ask you a personal question?" I think after today's conversation, you've earned that right, she replied, finally looking at him. What do you really want from life now? If you could choose anything, any path, what would it be? The question caught Emily off guard. It had been so long since she'd thought in terms of desires or dreams. The past year had been spent just trying to survive each day. I don't know, she admitted. Before I knew exactly what I wanted to have my own restaurant, to create dishes that made people happy, to teach Catherine how to cook when she grew up. But now it feels like dreaming is dangerous. Like I don't have the right to want good things after failing so miserably at the one thing that truly mattered, Emily said, scrubbing the pot harder than necessary. What if I told you your daughter wouldn't want to see you give up everything? That made you happy? Robert asked gently. Emily stopped scrubbing and stood still for a long moment. It's easy to say that when it wasn't you who lost a child, she said, her voice heavy with renewed pain. You're right, Robert admitted immediately. I have no idea what that pain feels like, but I do know what it's like to feel guilty for being alive when someone we love isn't. I know what it's like to think we don't deserve to be happy again. Emily turned to face him fully. And how do you deal with it? Badly, Robert answered honestly. Most of the time, badly. But today, talking to you, I remembered something Catherine always said. What? That the best way to honor those we love is to live a life that would make them proud. Not a perfect life, not a life without pain, but a life with purpose, Robert said, the words coming out as if he were remembering them for the first time in a long while. Emily felt something stir in her chest again. It was a strange feeling, as if a part of her that had been dormant for a year was slowly waking up. Catherine loved when I cooked new things, she said slowly. She was always my official taste tester. For experimental recipes, even when the results were questionable, she'd always say it was delicious because it was made with love. She sounds like a very wise girl, Robert remarked. She was. Wiser than her mother, definitely, Emily said. And for the first time she managed to speak about her daughter with more love than guilt in her voice. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the two stood in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. The kitchen was almost completely clean, and the hotel around them had grown quiet with the end of the event. Robert, Emily said suddenly, you mentioned you have a consulting company. Yes, why? Have you ever helped someone start over? Professionally, you mean? Robert looked at her curiously. Yes, often. I help businesses and people restructure their operations, find new paths when the old ones no longer work. Why do you ask? Emily hesitated for a moment, as if considering something she hadn't even realized she was thinking about. It's just, I was reflecting on what you said about honoring those we love by living a life that would make them proud. And I remembered something Olivia said shortly before the accident. What did she say? We were watching a cooking show on TV, and she mentioned that when she grew up, she wanted to open a restaurant with me. She said it would be a place where people wouldn't just come to eat, but to feel at home, to make friends, to celebrate good things, Emily shared, a wistful smile touching her lips. That sounds like a beautiful dream, Robert said. At the time, I laughed and told her she'd first have to learn not to burn scrambled eggs, Emily continued. But now I keep wondering if maybe I should try to make that dream come true for both of us. Robert felt a pang of emotion seeing the first real spark of hope in Emily's eyes since he'd met her. Have you ever seriously considered opening your own restaurant? Once, yes, I even had a rough business plan sketched out, but after everything happened, I tucked it all away in a drawer and never looked at it again, she admitted. What if you looked now? What if you seriously considered the possibility? Emily glanced around the kitchen where they stood, thinking of all the kitchens she'd worked in over the years, all the dreams she'd let go of. I don't know if I have the courage, she confessed. What if I fail? What if I can't create a place that truly honors her memory? What if you succeed? Robert countered. What if you build something incredible that touches hundreds of lives? The possibility hung in the air between them, weighted with equal parts potential and fear. You really think I could do it? Emily asked, her voice carrying a vulnerability that struck Robert deeply. I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You lost the most precious thing in the world, and yet you still create beauty through food. If anyone can turn pain into something meaningful, it's you, he said with conviction. Emily felt tears welling in her eyes again, but this time they were different. Not just sorrow, but something more complex. Gratitude, hope, even a flicker of excitement. It would be so much work, she murmured, clearly beginning to take the idea seriously. The best dreams always are, Robert replied. And I don't know the first thing about running my own business. I've always worked for other people, she went on, listing obstacles as if testing her own resolve. Those things can be learned. And if you'd like... Robert paused, unsure if he should make the offer forming in his mind. If you'd like, I could help. With the business side, I mean. Emily looked at him in surprise. Why would you do that? It was a fair question, and Robert took a moment to think. Why was he offering to help a woman he'd only known a few hours? Why did he feel this need to see her succeed? Because today you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, he said slowly. You reminded me that there's still purpose in the world, that it's still possible to create something meaningful, even after losing everything. And because I think Catherine would have loved seeing you bring this dream to life. His words lingered in the quiet kitchen, heavy with a truth they both could feel. There stood two people who had lost what they loved most, discovering that perhaps there was still a way to honor their losses by creating something new together. If I were to seriously consider this, where would I even begin? Emily asked, hesitantly. With the business plan you've kept in the drawer, Robert replied without hesitation. Then we talk about location, initial investment, permits, staff, one step at a time. Emily nodded slowly, as if waking from a long dream. All right, she said, her voice gaining a steadiness it hadn't had in a long time. All right, I'll think seriously about it. Really? Robert asked, a genuine smile appearing on his face for the first time that evening. Really, Emily confirmed, and for the first time in a year, she smiled back. At that moment, something shifted between them. This wasn't just a conversation, between strangers comforting each other. It was the beginning of a partnership, perhaps a friendship, and definitely a new possibility for them both. Emily, Robert said as he prepared to leave, can I make a suggestion? Of course. Tomorrow, when you wake up, before doing anything else, go to that drawer and take out the business plan. You don't have to do anything with it yet. Just look at it. See if it still makes sense, if it still stirs something in you. And if it does? She asked. Then you call me, Robert said, pulling a business card from his pocket. And we get to work. Emily took the card and studied it for a long moment. It was simple, professional, yet somehow it represented more possibilities than she had considered in a very long time. Robert, she called out as he headed toward the door, thank you for tonight, for listening, for reminding me I can still have dreams. Thank you, he replied, for reminding me I can still care about something beyond work. After Robert left, Emily was alone in the kitchen for the first time that night. But the loneliness felt different now. It wasn't the crushing emptiness that had followed her for the past year. It was a silence full of possibilities. She looked around the kitchen once more, but instead of seeing just the place where she worked to forget her pain, she began to imagine designing her own kitchen, how she would arrange the space for efficiency, what equipment she would choose, what the restaurant's dining area might look like. For the first time since losing Olivia, Emily went home that night with something other than exhaustion. A small flame of hope flickered in her chest, fragile still but real. Over the next 2 weeks, Emily and Robert met 3 times. First, Emily had indeed taken the business plan from the drawer and was surprised to find that her ideas from 2 years ago still excited her. The concept was for a cozy restaurant serving contemporary American cuisine, with dishes that told the culinary story of different regions across the country. At their second meeting, they gathered in Robert's office to review the financial plan. Emily was impressed by his meticulousness, how he could take her creative ideas and turn them into concrete numbers and strategies. "Have you thought of a name for the restaurant?" Robert asked during that meeting. Emily hesitated. She had, but she wasn't sure she should share it. "Olivia," she finally said. "I wanted to call it Olivia." Robert stopped writing and looked at her. "Are you sure? Won't it be too hard?" "Maybe," Emily admitted. "But she always dreamed of having a restaurant with me. If I'm going to do this, I want it to be ours, not just mine." "Then Olivia's restaurant it is," Robert said, writing the name at the top of the page in careful script. At their third meeting, they visited 3 potential locations. 2 were too expensive and 1 was perfect but needed a lot of renovations. Emily fell in love immediately with the third location, an old house in the historic downtown of Denver that had once been an Italian restaurant years ago. "It has character," she said, walking through the empty rooms. "I can picture people here talking, laughing, making memories." "I can too," Robert agreed, watching how Emily's eyes sparkled as she described her vision. But it was after this third meeting that things started to get complicated. Emily was excited, making plans, dreaming again. But she was also being watched. David Mitchell, the executive chef at the hotel where Emily worked, had noticed the changes in her. Emily had always been an exemplary employee, but in recent weeks she had been even more dedicated, more creative, more happy. And that deeply bothered him. David was a 52-year-old man who had built his career by stepping on lesser chefs. He had seen Emily as a threat for a long time. She was more talented, more innovative, more beloved by the team. The only reason he hadn't tried to fire her yet was because her period of mourning had made her harmless, apathetic. But now, on Monday morning, David called Emily into his office. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, not looking up from the papers on his desk. "Of course, Chef David, is something wrong?" Emily asked, sitting in the chair across from his desk. "I've heard you've been meeting with one of the hotel's guests." "That's against our policies," David said bluntly. Emily felt her stomach twist. How did he know about Robert? "I don't understand," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Robert Anderson. You've been seen together several times in the past few weeks. One of the waiters mentioned he's been in the kitchen a lot lately," David explained, finally looking up to meet her gaze. Emily felt a mix of anger and fear. Anger because David was clearly trying to create a problem where there wasn't one, and fear because she couldn't afford to lose her job. "Robert is a friend. We talk about cooking. I don't see anything wrong with that," she defended herself. "Emily, you're an exemplary employee, but you need to understand that personal relationships with guests can compromise the hotel's reputation. I can't allow that," David said, adopting a paternal tone that Emily knew was fake. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked. "That you stop seeing him immediately, and that you focus on the work you're being paid to do," David replied. Emily felt anger rising in her chest. After an entire year of being the perfect employee, working hard, never causing trouble, David was making up issues. "And if I don't agree?" she asked, knowing she was treading on dangerous ground. David smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "Then I'll have to reconsider your position here at the hotel. It would be a shame to lose such a talented chef, but I have responsibilities to the establishment's reputation," he said, making the threat very clear. Emily left David's office, shaking with anger. She knew exactly what was happening. He had noticed her changes, realized she was coming back to life, and it bothered him. David had always liked having employees who were dependent on him, insecure, grateful just to have a job. That evening, Emily called Robert and told him what had happened. "He can't do that," Robert said, clearly irritated. "We haven't done anything inappropriate. We haven't even met on hotel grounds. But he can make up any reason to fire me if he wants to, and I can't afford to be without a job right now, Robert. I can't take that risk," Emily explained, her voice heavy with frustration. "What do you want to do?" Robert asked. Emily was silent for a long moment. Part of her wanted to give up on everything, to return to the safety of merely existing without dreaming, but another part, the part that had awakened in recent weeks, refused to be silenced. "I want to leave the hotel," she finally said. "I want to bet on the restaurant." "Emily, are you sure? "It's a huge risk," Robert said, though there was pride in his voice. "I'm sure. If I'm going to honor Olivia's memory, it can't be with fear." "She always told me to be brave," Emily replied, and for the first time, her voice carried an ironclad determination. "Then let's make it happen," Robert said. "Let's bring Olivia's restaurant to life." But opening a restaurant wasn't simple, and the obstacles began to appear immediately. First, Emily discovered she would need much more startup capital than she had calculated. The location they wanted required more extensive renovations than they'd thought, and the necessary permits were more expensive and time-consuming to obtain. "We're talking at least $150,000 just to get started," Robert explained, showing her the updated spreadsheets. Emily felt the world crumbling around her. She didn't even have 10% of that amount saved. "What if we apply for a loan?" she suggested. "I've already checked. Without sufficient collateral and with it being a new business, no bank will lend us what we need," Robert replied sadly. Emily felt defeated. For a few weeks she had allowed herself to dream again, and now reality was crushing those hopes. "Maybe it was just a foolish dream after all," she said, trying to hide the pain in her voice. "Don't say that," Robert answered firmly. "We'll find a way, there's always a way." But in the weeks that followed, that way didn't appear. Emily kept working at the hotel, now under constant scrutiny from David, who seemed determined to find any reason to fire her. Robert tried several financing alternatives, but all were denied. The worst part was watching the light in Emily's eyes gradually fade again. She began slipping back into the apathetic state of the previous year, just going through the motions without passion or hope. Then, something unexpected happened. On a Thursday morning, Emily received a phone call that would change everything. "Emily Parker?" a woman's voice asked on the other end. "Yes, speaking," Emily replied. "My name is Sarah Wilson. I'm an attorney, and I'm calling about a matter related to your daughter, Olivia." Emily's heart stopped for a moment. Anything connected to Olivia was still a powerful emotional trigger. What about my daughter?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Do you remember the accident that took your daughter? Specifically the circumstances at the hotel?" The attorney asked delicately. "How could I forget?" Emily replied, feeling the familiar pain return. "Emily, may I come see you today? There are some important things I need to discuss in person, things that could change your financial situation significantly." Sarah Wilson arrived at Emily's house late that afternoon. She was a woman around 45, with graying hair pulled into an elegant bun, wearing an impeccable navy blue suit. She carried a leather briefcase and had a serious yet compassionate expression. "Emily, thank you for having me," Sarah said, sitting in Emily's small living room. "I still don't quite understand the reason for your visit," Emily admitted, serving coffee for both of them. "I'll be direct, because I know this is a painful subject for you. I represent a group of attorneys who investigate cases of negligence in public establishments, specifically cases where the lack of proper safety measures results in accidents," Sarah explained. Emily felt her stomach tighten. "Negligence? Emily, did you know that the hotel where the accident happened had 3 similar incidents in the 2 years before?" Sarah asked gently. "What?" Emily stood up abruptly. "What incidents?" 2 children and an adult who slipped in the same area by the pool. In every case, it was found that the flooring around the pool was inadequate, too slippery when wet. The hotel was notified about the problem multiple times, but never took corrective action, Sarah explained, pulling documents from her folder. Emily sat back down, her legs trembling. "Are you saying, Kat, that the accident could have been prevented?" "I'm saying the hotel was aware of a safety issue and chose to ignore it, and that constitutes gross negligence," Sarah confirmed. The implications of what she was hearing hit Emily like a wave. For an entire year, she had blamed herself for the accident, thinking that if she had paid more attention, if she had been a better mother, Olivia would still be alive. But if the hotel had truly known about a safety hazard— "Why are you telling me this now?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because we have a strong case against the hotel, and because you're entitled to significant compensation for the negligence that led to the loss of your daughter," Sarah explained. Emily was silent for several minutes, processing the information. Part of her was furious. How could the hotel know about a problem and do nothing? Part of her was relieved. Maybe it hadn't entirely been her fault. And part of her was confused about what to do with this knowledge. What kind of compensation? She finally asked. Based on similar cases and the documented negligence, we're talking about a substantial amount. Likely between $500,000 and $1 million, Sarah replied. Emily felt as if the world had stopped spinning. It was more money than she had ever imagined having in her life. And what do I need to do? She asked. Sign a power of attorney authorizing me to represent you and let us handle everything. The process may take a few months, but I'm almost certain we'll reach a settlement, Sarah explained. That night, Emily called Robert and told him everything. I can't believe it, he said. All this time you blamed yourself, and it was the hotel that was responsible. I don't know how to feel about this, Emily confessed. Part of me is relieved, but another part is angry, and a strange part of me feels guilty about potentially getting money from losing Olivia. Emily, this isn't about profiting from her loss. It's about holding the people truly at fault accountable. And if you get this money, you can use it to create something that honors her memory, Robert said softly. The restaurant, Emily whispered. The restaurant, he confirmed. Emily signed the papers with Sarah the next day. The legal process began immediately, and to everyone's surprise, the hotel didn't contest the case. They knew they were at fault and wanted to settle quickly and quietly. Within 6 weeks, Emily received a check for $700,000. She was in her kitchen when Robert arrived with the settlement papers. The two of them stared at the check for several minutes without speaking. It's real, Emily finally said. It's real, Robert confirmed. And now? Emily looked around her small kitchen, thinking of the kitchen at Olivia's restaurant they had once planned. She thought of her daughter, who had always dreamed of running a restaurant with her mother. She thought of all the people they could touch through food, all the memories they could help create. Now we make our dream come true, she said, renewed determination shining in her eyes. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers tremendously. Now, continuing. But having the money was just the first step. The following months were an emotional roller coaster of challenges and small victories. First, they had to renegotiate the lease for the spot they wanted. The landlord, knowing they now had capital, tried to significantly raise the price. Emily was devastated, thinking they'd lose. The perfect location. We're not giving up, Robert said firmly. Let's look at other places. But that place was perfect, Emily argued, frustration welling in her eyes. If it's truly meant to be ours, it'll still be there when we return with a better offer, Robert replied. They visited 12 other locations over 3 weeks. Some were too expensive, others were in terrible condition, and some had poor visibility. Emily started to believe they'd never find the right spot. Then, during their 13th visit, something unexpected happened. The space was smaller than they'd wanted, on a side street rather than the main one, but it had something special. The natural light streaming through the large windows created a warm atmosphere, and there was a back area that could be turned into a small garden. This isn't what we planned, Emily said, walking through the empty space. No, Robert agreed, but it has character. And look at this. He pointed to the exposed wooden beams on the ceiling. This would give the place incredible charm. Emily looked up and suddenly could picture it transformed. Rustic wooden tables, plants scattered throughout, an open kitchen where customers could watch their meals being prepared. It's smaller than we wanted, she said, but her voice held less resistance. Smaller means cozier, and we can always expand later, Robert suggested. And the garden in the back, we could have a little herb patch. Olivia always wanted us to have one, Emily said, a slow smile spreading across her face. So is this the one? Robert asked. Emily took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and for a moment tried to feel if this place was right. When she opened them again, there was certainty in her gaze. This is it, she confirmed, but signing the lease was only the beginning of their troubles. The permits needed to open a restaurant were far more complicated than they'd imagined. Between health inspections, business licenses, fire department approvals, and countless other Requirements? The process dragged on for 2 frustrating months. It feels like we discover a new hurdle every day. Emily vented during one of their many trips to city offices. It's part of the process, Robert tried to reassure her, though he was just as frustrated. At least we're learning. Everything the right way from the start. During this time, Emily also had to deal with the situation at the hotel. David had found out about the settlement money. News like that travels fast in a city like Denver, and his attitude toward her grew even colder. "So now you're rich and can afford to look down on your job here," he remarked snidely when Emily requested time off to handle restaurant matters. "David, I've always been a dedicated employee. One afternoon off for personal matters doesn't change that," Emily replied, keeping her composure. "Personal matters that involve competing with me in the food business," David shot back. "My restaurant will be completely different from what we do here. I don't see it as competition," Emily explained. "Oh, really? A contemporary American restaurant in the same city? Sounds like direct competition to me," David said, making it clear he'd done his research on her plans. The tension at the hotel became unbearable. David began publicly criticizing Emily's work, questioning her decisions in the kitchen, creating a hostile environment that affected the entire team. It was on a Tuesday morning that the situation exploded. Emily was preparing the lunch menu when David stormed into the kitchen, shouting, "This is unacceptable," he bellowed, slamming a plate onto the counter with force. "The salmon is dry, the sauce is under-seasoned, and the rice is mushy." Emily looked at the plate. It was a dish she had prepared with great care, following the menu specifications exactly. There was nothing wrong with it. "David, I tasted this dish before sending it out. It's perfect," she replied calmly. "Are you calling me a liar?" he roared, stepping closer to her in a threatening manner. "I'm saying I disagree with your assessment," Emily answered, standing her ground. "Then maybe it's time for you to find another job. Clearly, your skills no longer meet this hotel's standards," David said loudly enough for the whole kitchen to hear. Something inside Emily broke at that moment. A year and a half of silent humiliation, enduring David's attacks, being submissive to keep her job. But now she had an alternative, a different future waiting for her. "You know what, David?" she said, taking off her apron and placing it on the counter. "You're right. It's time for me to find another job. In fact, it's time for me to create my own job." "What are you doing?" David asked, clearly not expecting this reaction. "I'm resigning, effective immediately," Emily announced, her voice carrying a freedom she hadn't felt in years. "You can't do this. You have responsibilities here," David protested. "My responsibilities are to people who respect me, and clearly you're not one of them," Emily replied, gathering her personal belongings. "If you leave now, don't think." "You can come back," David shouted as she headed for the door. "I don't plan to," Emily answered without looking back. When Emily got home that afternoon, she was trembling. Not from fear, but from a mix of adrenaline and relief. She had spent so long accepting poor treatment because she needed the job that she had forgotten what it felt like to be respected. She called Robert immediately. "I quit," she announced as soon as he answered. "What? How? Why?" Robert asked, clearly surprised. Emily told him the whole story, and when she finished, Robert was laughing. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I know it was scary, but you did the right thing." "Now I have no more excuses not to focus entirely on the restaurant," Emily said, a renewed determination in her voice. "Now it's for real," Robert agreed. But being unemployed, even by choice, brought new pressures. Emily suddenly had a lot of time on her hands, and sometimes that meant too much time to think, to remember, to miss Olivia with renewed intensity. There were days when the guilt came back full force. Guilt for building a new life, for allowing herself to dream again, for using the money she had received because of her daughter's loss. It was during one of these difficult days that Emily made an important decision. She was alone at the future restaurant site, watching the workers make renovations, when she suddenly began to cry. "Olivia, my baby," she whispered into the empty space. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I don't know if I deserve to be happy again. I don't know if you'd approve of what I'm doing." For a moment, she allowed herself to feel all the pain, all the longing, all the guilt. she carried. And then, as if a gentle voice was speaking in her ear, she remembered something Olivia always said as a child. "Mommy, when you make delicious food, everyone is happy. And when everyone is happy, I'm happy too." Emily wiped away her tears and looked around the space once more. But this time she didn't just see a construction project. She saw a place where she could make people happy through food, where she could create special moments for families, where she could teach young chefs like Olivia might have been. "It's okay, my dear," she said to the air. "We'll do this together, just as it was always meant to be." From that day on, Emily threw herself into the project with renewed energy. She worked alongside the construction crew, hand-picked every detail of the decor, and planned every inch of the kitchen. Robert joined her whenever possible, offering administrative advice and emotional support when needed. But not everything went smoothly. 3 weeks before the scheduled opening, they discovered an electrical issue that would delay the launch by at least another month. Emily was devastated. "Maybe it's a sign," she told Robert, sitting among the boxes of equipment that couldn't yet be installed. "Maybe it's just not meant to work out. Or maybe it's just a technical problem that can be fixed," Robert replied pragmatically. "Emily, every project has setbacks. That doesn't mean it's some cosmic sign." "It's easy to say when your whole life doesn't depend on it," Emily shot back, frustration clear in her voice. "Actually, it's not just your life at stake," Robert said calmly. "I've also invested my time, my energy, and part of my heart in this project. If it fails, I fail too." Emily looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time in weeks. She had been so consumed by her own fears and anxieties that she hadn't noticed how emotionally invested Robert was in the restaurant's success. "I'm sorry," she said. "You're right. We're in this together." "We always have been," Robert confirmed. "And we'll fix this electrical issue and open the best restaurant Denver has ever seen." The electrical problem was resolved, but it cost them 2 extra weeks and a significant amount of additional money. When they finally received the final approval to operate, Emily and Robert were exhausted, stressed, and on edge. "What if no one comes?" Emily asked the night before the opening. "Or what if everyone comes and we can't handle it?" Robert chuckled at the irony of their opposite fears. "I think we're ready," Emily said, looking around the finished restaurant. The wooden tables she had envisioned were there. The plants brought life to the space, and the open kitchen allowed guests to watch the cooking process. In the backyard garden, small pots of herbs grew promisingly. "More than ready," Robert agreed. "Olivia would be proud." Emily smiled, and for the first time in a long while, her smile reached her eyes. "Yes," she said, "she would." The opening of Olivia's restaurant was set for a Friday evening. Emily had decided to host an invite-only event. Friends, former colleagues, some local food critics, and potential clients Robert had contacted. On the morning of the opening, Emily woke up with a mix of terror and excitement. She spent hours in the restaurant's kitchen, meticulously preparing each dish, adjusting seasonings, and checking presentations. "Breathe," Robert reminded her several times throughout the day. "You've done this 1,000 times before." "But never in my own restaurant," Emily replied, her hands trembling slightly as she chopped vegetables. "Exactly why it's going to be perfect," Robert said with conviction. By 7 in the evening, the first guests began arriving. Emily watched nervously from the kitchen as the tables filled with people chatting, laughing, and enjoying the atmosphere. The first dish served was an appetizer Emily had created especially for the evening, a contemporary take on the traditional chicken croquette, filled with shredded chicken in mild curry and served with homemade tamarind sauce. When she saw the expressions of delight on people's faces as they tasted it, Emily felt something she hadn't in a long time: pure professional pride. "Chef," called Tyler, the waiter she had hired. "Table 3 wants to compliment the chef." Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to hide in the kitchen all night. "Go," Robert encouraged her. "This is your moment." Emily removed her apron, smoothed her hair, and stepped out of the kitchen for the first time as the owner of her own restaurant. "Chef Emily," said an elegant woman in her 60s. "I'm Diane Thompson from The Daily Chronicle. I must say this chicken croquette is one of the most delicious things I've ever tasted. The blend of traditional and contemporary is perfect. Thank you so much, Emily replied, feeling her cheeks flush with pleasure. And the ambiance, Diane continued, is exactly what our city needed. A place that's sophisticated yet welcoming, elegant but not intimidating. Emily moved between the tables, receiving compliments, chatting with guests, explaining dishes. To her surprise, she found she loved this part of the job as much as cooking. The evening's main course was grilled salmon with a crust of Brazil nuts, served with parsnip puree and passion fruit sauce, a recipe Emily had developed to represent different regions of the United States in a single dish. "This passion fruit sauce is brilliant," remarked a man at the corner table. "I'd never thought to use passion fruit this way." "It was inspired by my grandmother's desserts," Emily explained. "She always said passion fruit wasn't just for sweets." As the night went on, Emily felt something growing in her chest, a sensation she hadn't felt in so long. The pure joy of doing what she loved and seeing others enjoy the result. When she served dessert, a deconstructed caramel custard with coconut ice cream and sweet toasted nut crumbs, she realized there were tears in her eyes. But they were tears of happiness, not sorrow. "Chef Emily," a familiar voice called. Emily turned and saw Sarah Wilson, the lawyer who had handled her case. "Sarah, I didn't know you were coming," Emily said, surprised. "I wouldn't have missed it. I had to see what you'd done with the outcome of our work together," Sarah said, glancing around the restaurant, "and I can say Olivia would be so proud." Hearing her daughter's name on such a special night made Emily pause. But instead of the familiar pain, she felt something different, a connection, as if Olivia were truly there, approving, smiling, proud of her mother. "Thank you," Emily said simply, "for everything." When the last guest left around midnight, Emily and Robert sat at one of the tables with a bottle of wine a guest had left as a gift. "How do you feel?" Robert asked. Emily considered the question for a long moment. "Whole," she finally said. "For the first time since I lost Olivia, I feel whole again." "The restaurant is perfect," Robert said. "You're perfect." Something in the way he spoke made Emily look at him more closely. There was something in his eyes she hadn't noticed before, or perhaps hadn't let herself notice. "Robert," she began, not quite sure what she wanted to say. "Emily, I need to tell you something," he said gently, interrupting her. "Over these months working together, building all of this, you've become very important to me, more important than I expected." Emily felt her heart race. She had felt the connection between them growing, but she had been so focused on the restaurant, so determined not to complicate things. "I also feel something special between us," she admitted. "But I'm afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of betraying Olivia's memory if I allow myself to be completely happy. Afraid of ruining our partnership if we try to be something more. Afraid of losing you too," Emily confessed. Robert reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "Catherine once told me that love doesn't divide the heart. It multiplies. Loving again doesn't mean loving those we've lost any less," he said. "And as for losing each other, Emily, I already lost you once when I thought I'd give up on everything. I won't let that happen again." Emily looked at their joined hands on the table, then at the restaurant around them, the dream they had built together, and felt something loosen in her chest. "So, what do we do now?" she asked. "Now we try to figure out what it's like to be happy again," Robert replied. "Together." And for the first time in nearly 2 years, Emily kissed someone. It wasn't a desperate kiss or one filled with wild passion, but a gentle one, full of promise, full of possibilities, full of hope. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "What would Olivia think of all this?" Emily asked. Robert thought. For a moment, remembering everything Emily had told him about her daughter, "I think she'd be happy to know her mother found someone who makes her smile again. And I think she'd love knowing the restaurant you dreamed of together finally exists," he answered. Emily nodded, feeling a peace she hadn't known in a long time. "I think you're right," she said. In the months that followed, Olivia's restaurant became one of Denver's most sought-after dining spots. Reservations were always full, the reviews were fantastic, and Emily discovered she had not only found her calling but also a new family. Robert officially became a partner in the restaurant, handling the administrative side, while Emily focused on the kitchen and service. Tyler, the waiter, became manager, and Emily hired 2 young cooks who reminded her of herself when she was starting out, hungry for knowledge and full of passion for cooking. "Chef Emily," said Jason, one of the young cooks, on a busy afternoon, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," Emily replied as she prepared a sauce. "How do you manage to put so much love into every dish? Even when we're rushed, even when the day is tough, your food always has something special." Emily stopped what she was doing and looked at the 19-year-old who reminded her so much of herself at that age. "Because I cook for people, not just customers," she explained. "Every dish that leaves this kitchen could be the meal that makes someone feel better after a bad day, or the dessert that turns a special date into something even more special. When you understand that food is love in solid form, it's easy to put your soul into it." "And when you lost your daughter, how did you keep loving food?" Jason asked hesitantly. Emily paused, considering the question. Months ago, such a question would have been devastating. Now she could answer it with a perspective she'd earned through great struggle. "For a while I didn't," she admitted. "Cooking became just mechanical, soulless. But then I realized that stopping loving food meant stopping loving a part of myself that my daughter adored. And that wasn't what she would have wanted." "So food became a way to keep her alive?" Jason asked. "Food became a way to honor who she was and who I am because of her," Emily gently corrected. "Every dish I make with love is a small tribute to the girl who dreamed of having a restaurant with me." Jason nodded, clearly moved by the answer. "Thank you, Chef. That makes sense," he said. That night, after the last customer left and the kitchen was clean, Emily and Robert sat in the backyard garden of the restaurant. The herbs they had planted were growing well, and the scent of basil and rosemary filled the air. "You know," Emily said, gazing at the stars, "sometimes I still can't believe we made it." "Made what?" Robert asked, taking her hand. "Everything. The restaurant, our partnership. Finding happiness again without forgetting those we lost," she explained. "It was a long road," Robert agreed. "And painful," Emily added. "But worth it," he concluded. Emily looked around the small garden, thinking about how it all began in that hotel kitchen, with her crying on the floor and a stranger deciding to stop and help. "Robert," she said, "can I ask you something I've always wanted to ask?" "Of course." "Why did you stop that day? Why didn't you just pretend you didn't see me crying and walk away?" Robert considered the question for a long moment. "Honestly, I can't fully explain it," he admitted. "There was something in your crying that reminded me of how I felt inside, like I recognized a pain similar to mine. And I think part of me needed to help you so I could help myself." "So we saved each other?" Emily asked. "I guess we did," Robert agreed, "each in our own way." During the first year of operation, Olivia's restaurant not only thrived financially, but became an integral part of the local community. Emily began offering cooking classes on Saturday mornings, teaching traditional American dishes with contemporary twists. Robert organized special themed nights, inviting other local chefs for collaborations. But perhaps the most special project was Emily's decision to create a culinary scholarship program for underprivileged youth. It was her way of giving back to the community while honoring Olivia's memory. "Olivia always wanted me to teach other kids how to cook," Emily explained to Robert when she proposed the idea. "This is our way of making that dream come true too." The program started small, with 3 scholarship students, but quickly grew. Emily discovered she loved teaching, and the young students brought an energy and creativity that renewed her own passion for cooking. It was during one of these classes that a moment happened that Emily would never forget. One of the scholarship students, a 12-year-old girl named Sophia, was struggling with a specific cutting technique. "I can't do it, Chef Emily," Sophia said, frustrated. "I'll never be a good cook." "Sophia, look at me," Emily said, kneeling to meet the girl at eye level. "When I was your age, I burned rice pudding 3 times in a row trying to make it for my mom. I thought I'd never be a chef." "Really?" Sophia asked, surprised. "Really? And you know what my daughter always told me when I made mistakes?" What? That mistakes are just ways of learning new things, and that what matters isn't doing everything perfectly on the first try, but keeping at it because you love it, Emily said, feeling as if Olivia's words were being spoken through her. Sophia smiled and tried the technique again. This time, she got it right. That night, when Emily told the story to Robert, they both grew emotional. "It's like she's still here teaching through you," Robert observed. "Sometimes I feel like she is," Emily admitted. "Not in a supernatural way, but her lessons, her way of seeing the world, are still part of who I am. And that makes me feel like she's not completely gone." 2 years after opening the restaurant, Emily and Robert made an important decision: to make their union official. They didn't want a big ceremony, just an intimate celebration at the restaurant itself, with the people they loved most. The ceremony took place in the backyard garden, among the herbs they had planted together. Diane Thompson, the journalist who had become a close friend, officiated. Tyler and the kitchen staff prepared a special dinner. The culinary students helped with the decorations, but the most touching moment came when Emily read the vows she had written. "Robert," she began, her voice steady but emotional, "you found me in my darkest moment and reminded me there was still light in the world. You didn't just help me build a business, you helped me rebuild my life. I promise to be your partner in everything, in dreams, in challenges, in joy, and in sorrow. And I promise there will always be room in our love to honor those we've lost, because they too made us who we are today." When Robert read his vows, he spoke about how Emily had taught him it was possible to love deeply, more than once in a lifetime, and that building something new didn't mean forgetting what had been lost. "Catherine taught me to love for the first time," he said. "Emily taught me it's possible to love again, and even more deeply, because it includes everything I've learned about loss, about gratitude, about never taking anything for granted." When they kissed as husband and wife, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. But for Emily, the most special moment was when she glanced at the memorial table they had prepared, with a photo of Olivia beside one of Catherine. It was their way of including those they loved in the celebration of their new beginning. During the reception, Sarah Wilson approached Emily. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for being here," Emily said, hugging the lawyer. "I wouldn't have missed it," Sarah replied, "but actually I have something for you." She handed Emily an envelope. "What is this?" Emily asked. "The hotel where Olivia's accident happened. They finally made the safety upgrades they should have done years ago, and when they did, they placed a small plaque by the pool area," Sarah explained. Emily opened the envelope and found a photo of the plaque. It read, "In memory of Olivia Parker and all the children we lost too soon. May this place always be safe for all families." Tears filled Emily's eyes, but they were tears of a complex emotion, sadness, relief, and even a little satisfaction. Knowing that Olivia's loss had led to changes that would protect other children gave her suffering an added meaning. "Olivia saved other children," Emily whispered. "Yes," Sarah confirmed, "and you saved other families by fighting for justice." That night, after all the guests had left, Emily and Robert stayed alone in the restaurant. It was technically their wedding night, but both agreed there was nowhere else they'd rather be. "So, Mrs. Anderson," Robert said, testing Emily's new name, "how do you feel?" "Complete," Emily answered, the same word she had used on opening night, but now with an even deeper meaning. "And you, Mr. Anderson?" "Grateful," Robert replied. "Grateful I had the courage to walk into that kitchen 2.5 years ago. And I'm grateful you saw something in me worth saving, even when I didn't," Emily said. They danced a slow song in the empty restaurant between the tables, where they had served hundreds of happy meals, under the soft lights that created a magical atmosphere. "What do you think comes next?" Emily asked. "Now we live," Robert answered simply. "We live each day grateful for what we have, honoring those we've lost, and building a future that would make them proud. And maybe one day, we could consider expanding our family," Emily suggested hesitantly. Robert stopped dancing and looked into her eyes. "You want that?" "I do. Not to replace Olivia. No one could ever do that." but to honor the love she taught me by passing it forward, Emily explained. Then that's something we can explore when we're ready, Robert agreed, kissing her softly. 3 years after their marriage, Emily and Robert did expand. Their family, adopting 5-year-old twins, a boy and a girl who had lost their parents in an accident. Noah and Lily brought a whole new energy to the restaurant and their lives. Aunt Emily, Lily asked one day while helping in the kitchen during her school break, why is there a picture of that girl on the wall? Emily looked at the framed photo of Olivia she kept in the kitchen, next to the one of Catherine. That's my daughter, Olivia. She went to heaven before you and Noah came along, Emily explained gently. Was she a chef like you? Noah asked, curious. She wanted to be. And you know what? I think in a way she is. Every time I cook something special, I feel like she's helping me, Emily replied. And the other woman in the picture? Lily asked. That's Catherine, Daddy Robert's first wife. She's in heaven too, but just like Olivia, she's still part of our family, Emily explained. So we have a big family, even if some are in heaven? Noah asked. Exactly, Emily confirmed. And what makes our family special is that it's built on love, not just blood. Watching Emily interact with the children filled Robert with renewed admiration for his wife. She had turned her pain into an even greater capacity to love, her loss into an ability to cherish every moment with their new family. One evening, after Noah and Lily had gone to bed, Emily and Robert were reviewing plans for the second location of Olivia's restaurant, this time in a neighboring town. Sometimes I still can't believe everything we've built, Emily said, looking at the blueprints spread across the table. It was a lot of work, Robert agreed. And a lot of pain too, Emily added. But now I understand that the pain wasn't the end of the story. It was just a bridge to something new. Olivia would be proud, Robert said, as he always did when he saw Emily reflecting on her journey. She would. And Catherine would be proud of you too, Emily replied, for finding a way to honor her love by building a new love with us. I think they'd both be happy to know we haven't forgotten them, but we also didn't let them be the end of our ability to love, Robert reflected. That night, before bed, Emily did something that had become a ritual. She went to the backyard garden of the restaurant and stood for a few minutes among the herbs gazing at the stars. Hi, Olivia, she whispered. Just wanted to share the news. Noah and Lily are growing up so fast, and I think you'd like them. Noah has your curiosity about food, and Lily has your stubbornness when she wants to learn something new. The restaurant is doing well. We're opening a second location, and Robert is still the best partner I could ask for. A gentle breeze rustled the herb leaves, carrying their fragrance through the garden. I know you're okay, wherever you are, and I hope you know I'm okay too, that I found a way to live that honors who you were and who you taught me to be. I love you, my daughter. Always will. Emily stayed in the garden a few minutes longer, feeling a peace that had grown familiar over the years. It wasn't the absence of longing, but the presence of gratitude for having been Olivia's mother, even if only for a little while. When she returned home, Robert was waiting for her in the kitchen with 2 cups of tea. How is she? He asked softly, as he always did after these moments when Emily connected with Olivia's memory. She's fine, Emily replied, accepting the cup. And we're fine too. Yes, Robert agreed, pulling her into a hug. We are. And there, in the kitchen of their home, surrounded by the love they had built together, Emily knew she had achieved something she once thought impossible. She had found a way to be completely happy again, without ever forgetting the one who had taught her to love for the first time. The secret Emily had shared with Robert in that hotel kitchen years ago wasn't just about losing Olivia. It was about guilt, about the fear of not deserving happiness, about the struggle to move forward. But by sharing that pain with someone who also understood loss, she had found not just a business partner, but a life companion. And perhaps that was the real change the secret had brought to Robert's life. The understanding that shared pain becomes lighter, that multiplied love grows stronger, and that sometimes the most beautiful endings arise from the most painful beginnings. Years later, when Noah and Lily were teenagers and actively helping at the restaurant, Emily would be asked in an interview what the defining moment in her journey of healing had been. "It was when I realized my daughter wouldn't have wanted me to stop living because of losing her," Emily answered. "She taught me to love, to dream, to believe in possibilities. Stopping those things would have wasted the gifts she gave. Me? And your husband? What was his role in that journey?" Robert reminded me that it was possible to build something new without destroying something old, that I could honor Olivia and still have a new life. That love doesn't have a limit, Emily explained. "What advice would you give to others who've experienced similar losses?" Emily thought for a long moment before answering that there's no timeline for grief, no magic formula to overcome it. Everyone must find their own way. But I can say that for me, the key was finding a way to turn pain into purpose. Olivia's restaurant didn't bring my daughter back, but it gave me a way to keep alive everything she meant to me. What about the guilt many mothers feel in these situations? Guilt was perhaps the hardest part to overcome, Emily admitted. "It took me a long time to understand that accidents happen, that we aren't responsible for everything that happens to our children, no matter how much we want to protect them. And when I found out the hotel was liable for the accident, it was freeing but also confusing. It took time to accept that I could pursue legal action without it meaning I was profiting from my daughter's loss." What would you say to your daughter if you could speak to her today? "That I made it, Olivia. I created the restaurant we dreamed of together. I found love again without lessening the love I feel for her. I learned to be happy again, and that isn't a betrayal of her memory. It's the greatest tribute I could give," Emily replied, tears in her eyes but a smile on her face. When the interview ended, Emily returned to the restaurant where Robert was training 2 new cooks, where Noah was learning to make handmade pasta, and where Lily was testing a new dessert recipe. "How was the interview?" Robert asked, embracing her. "Good. It made me think about how far we've come," Emily answered. "And how do you feel about this whole journey?" he asked. Emily looked around the restaurant, the tables filled with happy customers, the bustling kitchen alive with activity, the young people who had become part of her family, both biologically and professionally. She thought of Olivia, who would be 15 now, probably helping in the kitchen and brimming with new ideas for dishes. She thought of Catherine, who would have loved to see Robert so fulfilled personally and professionally. "I think it was worth it," she finally said. "All the pain, all the effort, all the moments I thought I couldn't go on. It was worth it because of this." She gestured to the restaurant, to the family they had built. "And it was worth it for this too," Robert said, kissing her gently. That night, after the restaurant closed and everyone had gone home, Emily made her usual visit to the garden, but this time she wasn't alone. Noah and Lily accompanied her, already familiar with their adoptive mother's ritual. "Hi, Olivia," Emily said as always. "Today was a special day. I talked about you to so many people, about how you changed my life. Noah made a carbonara that was almost perfect on his first try, and Lily created a dessert I think you'd love." She glanced at Lily. "Do you want to tell her about your creation?" Lily, 11 years old and already showing a natural talent for pastry, smiled shyly. "Hi, Olivia. I'm Lily. I made a chocolate cake with chocolate fudge balls filling and strawberry frosting. Aunt Emily said you love chocolate fudge balls," she said to the air. "And I practiced that vegetable cutting technique you always wanted to learn, Mum," Noah added. "Finally managed to do it without cutting my fingers." Emily smiled, watching how the children had naturally embraced the tradition of connecting with Olivia. "I think she would have loved you both," Emily said, "and I'm sure she's happy knowing our family has grown." When they returned home that night, Robert was waiting with hot chocolate for everyone. "Family together?" he asked. "Family complete," Emily corrected, mentally including Olivia and Catherine in the concept. Years later, when there were 3 Olivia's restaurants in operation, and Emily had become a respected figure in regional cuisine, she still kept the ritual of talking to Olivia in the garden. But now sometimes it was Noah or Lily who gave the updates, sharing their own culinary and romantic adventures. Noah followed in Emily's footsteps and became a chef, specializing in handmade pasta. Lily chose pastry and opened her own pastry shop at 22. Both carried Olivia's legacy without ever having met her, understanding she was an integral part of their family's story. And Robert, at 65, still felt emotional watching Emily in the kitchen, creating dishes that touched people's hearts. He still remembered that first night in the hotel kitchen when a desperate woman became the most important person in his life. You know, he said one evening, watching Emily teach a new intern how to season a sauce, sometimes I think Olivia planned all this. What do you mean? Emily asked, looking at him. I think she knew you'd need someone to help fulfill your dream, and somehow she made sure I was in that kitchen at the right time, Robert explained. Emily considered the idea, smiling. Maybe she was always too clever for her age, she agreed. And if she did plan it, well, thank you, Olivia, for giving me the perfect family. And so the secret Emily had shared with Robert that March night years ago had transformed from a source of pain into a source of purpose. Guilt had become responsibility, loss had become legacy, and pain had become the foundation for a deeper, more conscious happiness. Olivia's restaurant continued to thrive, not just as a business, but as a testament that it's possible to build something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. And whenever someone asked Emily about the restaurant's name, she would tell the story of a 7-year-old girl who dreamed of being a chef and who, though no longer physically present, still inspired people through food made with love. Because sometimes the most painful secrets, when shared with the right people, become the foundation of the most beautiful stories in our lives. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of Emily and Robert's story. Do you think Emily made the right decisions along her journey? What moved you most in this story of resilience and love? Share your honest thoughts. We love reading your opinions. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.